Shabbat Shalom. There was a sketch comedy show in Israel in the 1970s called Lul, and one of the sketches that became more well-known and popular in Israel was called Aliyah. And in the sketch, the actors portray Jews arriving in Israel from different countries in the different waves of Aliyah, of immigrants coming to the land of Israel. And the sketch pokes fun at the experience of being a new immigrant, literally being fresh off the boat, because most of these immigrants were coming by boat. But the through line, the thing that's notable in each round of immigration is that the first thing that the Olim do is they drop to their knees and they kiss the ground. They kiss the land of Israel. This is an iconic image, right? An iconic image of not just new Olim, but many people come to Israel, get off the plane, kiss the ground. We saw Pope John Paul II get off the plane and kiss the ground. Even Richard Branson, when Virgin Airlines started flying to Israel, when he came to Israel, he got off the plane and he kissed the ground. I didn't know that, by the way. It just came up when I Googled pictures of kissing the ground in Israel. But he was told this is the traditional thing to do. And maybe you've done this. Maybe I've done this. I'm not even sure. And I think people do this out of respect for the land, and also perhaps out of a belief that there is intrinsic holiness in the land of Israel, even on the tarmac. It's holy. And if you've kissed the ground in Israel, then maybe you've had that feeling. And even if you haven't ever gotten to your knees and kissed the ground in Israel, you may have expressed this idea by referring to Israel as the Holy Land, right? That title in and of itself conveys a sense of the land being holy. Now, I would be the first to say that I have had many experiences of holiness and divine energy in Israel pretty much every time that I have been there. And you may have as well if you have traveled to Israel. And if you have, I invite you just for a moment to reflect on those experiences and to ask yourself, is that because the land of Israel is holy? Do we believe that the land itself is holy? Now, this question of the intrinsic sanctity of the land is a question that Jewish texts and Jewish thinkers have been asking and answering for many, many years throughout our history. And it has also been a central question in the development of Zionism, or I should say Zionisms, the multiple and divergent views on what it means to have a Jewish country. And I think this is a central question for Israel today. And the answer to this question, the way that Israel chooses to answer this question, will have profound implications for its future and the future of the Jewish people, for life and death in this moment of Jewish history. This is not an abstract question. This is an appropriate question to be asking at this time in the Jewish calendar. We are in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, a period of mourning that begins on the 17th of Tammuz. And as we progress toward Tisha B'Av and culminating in the day itself, we move more deeply, more intensely into the experience of mourning and grief. On the 17th of Tammuz, traditionally there are certain mourning practices and restrictions that people take on. And then with Rosh Chodesh Av, which we will meet next week, the beginning of the month of Av, that gets even more intense, more restrictions, more expressions of mourning. And then on Tisha B'Av itself, the day is the most intense that we can feel. We fast, we sit on the floor, we don't wear leather shoes. This is the height of grief. And this is the opposite of how mourning usually works in the Jewish tradition, right? When one experiences a loss, first there's the intensity of Shiv'ah, the 7 days of Shiv'ah, then there's the period of Shloshim, 30 days, and then the year. So we kind of move away from that initial shock and severity of the experience of loss. But here we're moving toward it. And I would say that it's not just our behaviors and our practices that could and should become more intense during this time, but our spiritual approach to these weeks also should grow in intensity, in the questions that we ask ourselves about this moment, or these moments, I should say, in Jewish history. The moments where Jewish sovereignty was lost, where Jewish power was lost. We need to think more deeply about the history of our people. And this year, and today, even more so, the questions about Jewish power and the future of the land of Israel and the meaning of the state of Israel, they ring so loudly. They ring so loudly, like never before in my lifetime, certainly, and I think that's true for many of us. What is the meaning of the state of Israel? What does it mean to speak about holiness, to understand that there's a holiness in the state of Israel? And can that belief, can that understanding be a source of goodness, a force for goodness? I want to attribute religious meaning, not just political meaning, to the Jewish state. How can that be done? I'm asking. Many people are asking. How can that be done without moving into a very dangerous and zealous fundamentalism? For most of his life, a towering public intellectual in Israeli society was asking these questions and thinking about possible answers up until his death in 1982. His name was Yeshayahu Leibowitz. If you recognize the name Leibowitz and it makes you think of Nechama Leibowitz, the biblical commentator, this was her brother. He was an Orthodox Jew. He was a Zionist, unequivocally. He believed in the Jewish state and Jewish sovereignty and that Jews should live in Israel, but he was deeply, deeply concerned with a vision of Zionism, of religious Zionism, that was driven by a belief that the land itself is inherently holy. He famously condemned the occupation of the territories after the Six-Day War and completely rejected the messianic language that religious Zionists attributed to that victory. He believed in a two-state solution, and he was very controversial and highly critiqued, but that did not stop him. At every opportunity, he went to put his views out into Israeli society. And one of the places where he did this, where he shared his views with the Israeli public, was on a weekly talk on the Torah portion on Israeli public television for 1 year, from 1984 to 1985, that year of the Torah cycle. And here's what he had to say about the Torah portion and its connection to the Haftarah that we are about to read, and the place of that Haftarah and the Torah portion as one of the three special haftarot of rebuke, of calamity, the three special haftarot that we read in the Shabbatot leading up to Tisha B'Av. So we didn't read this verse this morning. This is chapter 35, verse 33 in our Parsha, he notes that there's a very strong warning against the spilling of blood, polluting the land through murder. And on the heels of this warning, the Torah says, "Velo titameh et haaretz." You shall not defile the land. You shall not defile the land in which you live, in which I myself, God, dwell, for I, Adonai, dwell among the Israelite people. And Leibowitz notes this last phrase, I, Adonai, dwell among the Israel people. He says God does not actually dwell in the land. God dwells among the Israelite people, among the Jewish people. God's presence in the land is only because the people are there and create a mishkan, create a holy dwelling place for God. And if the land were intrinsically holy, it's not that the land is intrinsically holy, because if it were, how could it be defiled? How could something that at its essence is holy be defiled, as the Torah says, don't defile the land? Here we see, he writes, that it is possible for human beings to defile the land, and he sees these words as a very clear refutation of the idea that the Torah itself ascribes sanctity to the land of Israel. And then he goes on to present a linguistic connection between the Torah portion and between the Haftarah, chapter 2 of Isaiah that we're about to read. And he shows that these texts are linked, which is not the traditional understanding of the Torah portion and the Haftarah at this time. Generally, we think of the three Haftarot of rebuke as being related to the time of year, but not actually connected in content to the Torah portion, which is different from how it goes throughout the year, where there is a thematic connection. But Leibowitz gives us a way to see a through line from the Torah portion into the Haftarah and connect that to the spiritual work of these weeks. Here are the words, chapter 2, verse 6 from Yirmiyahu. I brought you to this country of farmland to enjoy its fruit and its bounty. Vatitamehu et artzi. You hear that same word again, tameh. You came and defiled my land, Yirmiyahu says. V'nachalati samtem letoiva. You made my land, my possession, an abomination. So again, we see this same idea in the Parsha and in the Haftarah, and this is the spiritual message of this moment, Yirmiyahu says. And this is the spiritual message of this moment, Leibowitz says, to open our ears to the message of the prophets and hear what he's trying to tell us. He writes, observing the mitzvot in the land, observing the mitzvot is what accords it holiness. Human actions can transform God's land into impurity, into an abomination. This is the message that we need to internalize more deeply, more intensely in these 3 weeks. As I said, Leibowitz was a Zionist. He embraced Zionism, but he passionately believed that any Zionism that subscribed to the idea that the land was inherently holy was very, very dangerous. And we have seen that. Some of the strands of the religious Zionist camp in Israel have demonstrated that in horrific ways. Most critically, what Leibowitz is conveying to us here is not only that it's dangerous, but it's not reflective of God's will. It's not reflective of what the Torah says, which is a claim that is made by some in that camp. And he called this dangerous notion an indubitable, idolatrous idea. To consider the land itself holy is idolatry. So, in what ways was Zionism a religious project for Leibowitz? And what might we learn from his ideas? How could they be meaningful for us? Again, I am someone, I think many in this room, want to or do experience the state of Israel as having religious meaning. Leibowitz saw the state of Israel and the building of a Jewish society as a place for wrestling of moral dilemmas, a place in which to wrestle with moral dilemmas, which is a very religious thing to do. And he did believe that the Jewish country could be holy, with the holiness being created and maintained by observing the mitzvot and behaving ethically and living a Jewish life. Jeremiah, Leibowitz says, was speaking not only to the Jews of his time, but to all the generations to come, and to us as well. And so when we read on this Shabbat the critique of the prophet, his condemnation of Israel's idolatrous relationship to the land, we should be challenged to consider the idols of our time that lead our people, that could lead our people to destruction. He echoes the idea expressed in the introduction to the book, The Prophets, where Abraham Joshua Heschel writes that while prophecy has ceased, the prophets endure and can only be ignored at the risk of our own despair. And we are at that moment of despair. We have been at that moment, and it is increasing. I don't want to end on this note. We're going to read the Haftarah, and it's going to end on this note, and we're going to be able to walk away sad. But I do want to give us, even though we're in these 3 weeks leading toward Tisha B'Av, I want to give us a little bit of hope. As much as it is incumbent upon us now to open ourselves to an increasingly intense experience of grief and of mourning and of consideration of what this period means for us and how we might take the tragic lessons of Jewish history into our lives today, the 10th of Av will come. This has been the story of our people. We are part of a much larger drama where the 10th of Av does come. We can get to the other side of this despair and this grief. And when we do, it will be just as incumbent upon us to find hope, to look for the seeds of hope, to elevate the stories of those people today in Israel who exist. They're not making the headlines, but they are there. They are doing the work of imbuing religious meaning into the political project of Zionism in ways different from Leibowitz might, but they're doing that work. They are creating and defining and redefining religious Zionism to be something that all can embrace, that is holy. And we need to we need to celebrate those leaders. We don't want to sanctify them, but we do want to celebrate them. We want to celebrate the hope that they offer the country and the people of Israel, because they believe, as I do, in a religious Zionism that centers its religiosity in the activity of sanctification. Not because anything is inherently sacred, but the work of building a moral society, of doing deeds that bring us closer to God. That is a religious Zionism. I pray at this moment for peace in Israel. And I pray that we will soon see the day when all who love Israel kiss the ground, not because it is holy, but because we recognize that our work can create holiness in the state of Israel like we've never done before in our history. Can you hear Ratzon? May it be God's will. Shabbat Shalom.